Hi everyone, today we're talking about extroverted sensing or SE. This is the last video of the series that I'm making on cognitive functions through the lens of Carl Jung. As you've probably noticed, over the past few months I've been discussing all of the 8 cognitive functions with respect to the way Carl Jung talked about these functions in his book Psychological Types. So what I'm going to do today as well is take certain quotes, certain expressions and explanations from the book and discuss them with you so that we better understand what extroverted sensing is about, or extroverted sensation, the way it is called by Carl Jung originally. So basically we're talking about a function that exists in ESTPs and ESFPs as a dominant function, and in ISFPs and ISTPs as an auxiliary or parent function, as known from other systems or other way of classifying the functions. So all about that in the next few minutes. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's dive in. So guys, extroverted sensing or extroverted sensation. It is a perception function, okay? So the way we discussed in the previous videos as well, thinking and feeling are decision-making functions or judging functions, whereas sensation and intuition are perception functions. This should not be confused, as I was saying in my previous videos, with P or J, the letters that we use in the 4-letter acronym to describe the types, because it doesn't always work like that. With SE, it does, because SE is present in P types as a dominant or auxiliary functions, and it is also a perception function. But with half of the functions, it's not the case. So just for you to kind of get an idea of the kind of words that Jung used in his book and in his theory, perception simply means what we understand by this word normally, so the way we perceive what happens around us. And extroverted sensing or extroverted sensation is one of those functions. Okay, so let's start by talking about what Jung wrote about this function. So, quote, "No other human type can equal the extroverted sensation type in realism. His sense for objective facts is extraordinarily developed. His life is an accumulation of actual experience with concrete objects, and the more pronounced he is, the less use does he make of his experience. In certain cases, the events of his life hardly deserve the name experience. He knows no better use for this sensed experience than to make it serve as a guide to fresh sensations. Anything in the least new that comes within his circle of interest is forthwith tuned with a sensational account and is made to serve his end." So basically, the idea that stands out the most here is that extroverted sensing is very much concerned with reality. We know that sensing functions tend to be more attuned to reality, but more so than introverted sensing that we discussed last week, extroverted sensing has an even stronger focus on reality because of his extroverted nature. It focuses on the concrete object, and here, Jung uses the word concrete in a lot of different contexts. It associates it with sensation, with sensing, because it's focused more on concrete than abstract, but it also uses the word concrete when it describes extroverted processes. So to an extent, it applies to all extroverted functions. But when it comes to extroverted sensing, because we've got both sensing as a function and the extroversion, this really makes the individual very much focused on the concrete reality. And of course, if someone is so deeply concerned with that, they will have a very high dose of realism. A lot of ESTPs and ESFPs are considered to be, people who always give others a reality check. And that's because they find it so easy to understand what is real, what is tangible, what is actually there, They trust what they see. They trust what they experience. They trust what their senses tell them. They trust what the external physical feedback basically brings to them. And because of that awareness, they are very much likely to be annoyed when people are very people are very, let's say, dissociated from reality, because they might be thinking, well, how can you not see that? How is that not obvious to you? And that's especially the case for SE hero types, ESTPs and ESFPs, but honestly, I've seen a lot of ISTPs and ISFPs do it a lot. They often also make people look at what is around them, point them to what seems obvious to them in the physical concrete world, whereas to other types who have extroverted sensing lower in their stack, this might seem really weird. Like, what are you showing to me? This is not really obvious at all. Okay, moving on to Jung's writing, he also said, in reality, however, this is by no means the case, since they are equally subject to the sensation of irrational chance happenings as they are to rational behavior. Such a type, the majority are apparently men, does not of course believe himself to be subject to sensation. He would be much more inclined to ridicule this view as altogether inconclusive, since from his standpoint sensation is the concrete manifestation of life. It is simply the fullness of actual living. So what Jung is trying to say here is that as it is the case with most dominant or hero functions, people are so immersed into this process controls their psyche so much that they see it as less important than it might actually be, or they see it as less complex as other people might see it, because they just take it for granted in a way. And reading a little bit between the lines, what Jung is also trying to show here is that SE types, especially ESTPs and ESFPs, they get quite annoyed when someone tries to put something too much into a theoretical framework without any examples or concrete facts or very objective information. And I've seen this with some ESTPs and ESFPs that I know. They get very frustrated if me or someone else starts talking about just the theory, and they constantly interrupt you and stop you and say, okay, but what's an example of that? Or why is this useful? Or they simply change the course of the conversation when I'm like, please just let me stop, just let me finish telling you my theory. And I find it quite funny. I was also talking to an ESTP lately, and he was telling me that, for him, theory has absolutely no value if it does not come from a practical standpoint, if it does not come from, experience or facts backing it up. And I think, this is a pretty good way of understanding sensation and intuition, rather than just thinking that sensation is about surface level things, because it's not the case at all. Sensation is about, understanding the concrete world in a very deep way, for that matter, in a way that, intuitive types might find it difficult to understand the world through, okay? Now, moving on. His aim is concrete enjoyment, and his morality is similarly oriented. For true enjoyment has its own special morality, its own moderation and lawfulness, its own unselfishness and devotedness. It by no means follows that he is just sensual or gross, for he may differentiate his sensation to the finest pitch of aesthetic purity without being the least unfaithful, even in his most abstract sensations, to his principle of objective sensation. Upon the lower levels, this type of man, this is the man of tangible reality, with little tendency either for reflection or commanding purpose. To sense the object, to have, and if possible to enjoy sensation, is his constant motive. So what I gather from this, and something I really agree with, is that high SE types are much more interested on directing their attention to the outside, to what they can see, to what they can directly experience, and much less likely to turn their attention to the inside when they focus on their own inner processes. They prefer directing this source of attention outside and enjoying. I know John Beebe was using words such as enjoy, experience, in order to describe SE, because in a very cute way, I think high SE types are really good at enjoying the moment, enjoying the experiences that they go through, getting this sense of natural happiness with what happens around them. If you remember, in a previous video that I made a few months ago, I was talking about ecocentric psychology, a map of the mind based on 4 archetypes. And one of these archetypes is the wise innocent, or the wise child. And this is the part of ourselves that is very much curious to understand the here and now, the concrete world, to look at it through the eyes of a child who experiences things with his or her senses. And it does it in a very pure way. And I always thought that this is, in a way, kind of related to extroverted sensing, and the people who are more connected to it tend to have higher extroverted sensing. Whereas others who find it difficult to access that energy might have it a little bit repressed. But anyway, I think this is one of the gifts that SE brings into the world: enjoyment, and just, going through experience and feeling it all. Drawing these resources that come from objective, concrete experiences in order to experience life to its fullest. And I think this is one of the gifts that ESTPs, ESFPs especially bring into the world. Okay. When he senses everything essential has been said and done, nothing can be more than concrete and actual. Tangible reality under any conditions makes him breathe again. In this respect, he is unexpectedly credulous. So basically, again, this shows how important reality and concrete experience is to these types. And then, of course, Jung goes on to talk about the repressed intuition, which is the inferior function of ESTPs and ESFPs. He says, but above all, the repressed intuitions begin to assert themselves in the form of projections upon the object. More acute cases develop every sort of phobia, and especially compulsive symptoms. Although this lack of basic principles in the sensation time does not argue an absolute lawlessness and lack of restraint, it at least deprives him of the quite essential restraining power of judgment. So these two together show that because these types might repress intuition, it might come out as certain doses of anxiety that is really not adapted to the context. And at the same time, it shows that because SE makes these people jump into action and into a reactive mode, it might come across as not very controlled, not very planned, not very focused. Okay, so these are my thoughts on the way Carl Jung described extroverted sensation as a cognitive function and as a type in psychological types. I'm really curious if you have any other, thoughts, reflections, opinions, ideas on this cognitive function. I'm really curious to see what you think. And again, thank you a lot for being with me. Thank you a lot for watching my videos. See you next time with another video. And in the meantime, have a great time.